Hey guys, and welcome to my camera comparison between the Samsung Galaxy S9, Galaxy S10 and the brand new Galaxy S20. I'm curious to find out if they've done any significant improvements across those three generations. Without further ado, let's put them to the test. Beginning with the first landscape, you can clearly see the difference in the HDR department. Just to clarify, I've set it on auto on all of them, though it means completely different thing on the oldest Galaxy. I believe that in opposite to the Galaxy S9, both the S10 and the S20 almost always uses some form of multi-exposure techniques. You can see the S10 is emphasizing the dynamic range aspect the most here. The S20 is a little bit less intense. In this shot, looks like the S9 software decided to not use the HDR mode once again. The Galaxy S10 with its powerful tendencies in the exposure department provided the brightest picture of all. The S20 is a little bit underexposed and there is something with the colors that make it look a little bit weird in my opinion. And finally, the S9's Auto HDR decided to collaborate, and we can fully compare all of the bones in this term. So the results are at least surprising. As I showed in my S10 vs S20 comparison video, it seems that in opposite to the usual trend of increasing the HDR strength each year, this time Samsung decided to make it work in a much more gentle way. In this example, to be honest, I prefer the S10's picture. I think the colors were the best overall. The S9 looks a little bit too dull, whereas the S20 is a bit underexposed, and I didn't like the colors of the sky. If you watch my channel, you know, I've made a lot of videos about DSLRs and mirrorless, including reviews of some really professional large sensor gear, and I've never really complained about lack of smartphone-like auto HDR in those, because obviously I get pleasant results with great colors, depth and details, and I can also extensively play with the highlights and shadows in a post-process. That said, with smartphones we got used to the handy HDR, which tries to deliver the best out of the camera results, or should I say it doesn't deliver in case of the S20. So in this shot, deciding between the other two, I have some internal struggles. On one hand, the S9 looks more natural, but on the other, the S10 is more fancy looking. Something in the middle would probably be ideal, but we unfortunately won't find it in the S20. And just to show you a big similarity between each phone, sometimes they perform practically the same. Also, a very important thing, keep in mind the S9 is the only one that lacks the ultra-wide angle and the telephoto lens in this comparison, and whereas I don't really use zoom that much, I am in love with the ultra-wide angle lens. It's pure fun to use, see for yourself. In terms of colors, there are subtle variations, but the overall color science stays the same, I would say. Taking a closer look at the nuances reveals that the latest Galaxy provides the most saturation, especially visible in the sunset area in this picture. And let's not forget previously mentioned Auto HDR difference, which makes the S9 look a little bit too dull in here. Obviously it will sometimes affect the colors. Once again, the S10 is slightly less saturated than the S20, which in this case was probably slightly more accurate. Now let's focus on the details and sharpness. Starting with the first close-up of this padlock, it seems that the level of detail remained pretty much the same across those generations, but I think we got some boost in sharpness. The S9 has the least digital sharpening going on, the S10 is slightly more crispy, then we have the S20 with the most sharpness. And the next picture, by the way this wood texture is a great test, confirms no significant changes in the level of detail. Although looking at the S20, you will find more shallow depth of field with noticeable lack of sharpness at the edges caused by a slightly larger sensor and lack of variable aperture, which was present on the other two generations. In this example, the S10's picture is unsurprisingly the brightest one, but probably because of that it also has the biggest amount of noise, if we will go into the crop. Otherwise they are similar, maybe the S20 provided a little bit more depth and definition than the other two, but the difference is so small that I shouldn't be really talking about it. Now let's quickly overview two Galaxy S20's biggest weaknesses. Firstly, the optical distortions. You may not notice this all the time, but in some shots, like here, it's quite disturbing. I've heard the assumptions that it's because of the lack of optics improvement that should be made when they've increased the sensor size. Either way, in the result, it looks worse than both the S9 and the S10. Secondly, the often discussed autofocus issues. Unfortunately, this is not a rumor. At the moment, the S20's autofocus is less reliable than in the older two. You will experience struggles mostly when shooting close-ups. It often focuses on the background instead of the subject you point on. Even if you tap to focus, as I did here on this watch, it doesn't help. Anyway, some say it will be fixed with the future updates. Moving to the video quality. By the way, I am sorry because the S9 was slightly shakier, partly because it was put on less stable mount, which I've noticed just now while editing this video. That said, both the S10 and S20 are superior in terms of stabilization, but other aspects are almost the same. I don't see any major variation in the level of detail. Maybe the S20 is tad worse when it comes to the sharpness, probably due to that mentioned more shallow depth of field. Unless we use the 8K option, which truly shines, but sadly it comes with many drawbacks, like worse stabilization, poor autofocus and low frame rate. In the end, I've preferred if they've done, for example, oversampling of 6K to 4K. I hope they will improve on that in the next Galaxy. As for the low-light performance, as you see, the colors are a little weird, but the handling of noise seemed to be improved on the S20. Just take a look at this road area with a little bit more details and fewer artifacts compared to both the S9 and the S10. In this picture you can see the sunset emphasized by the S20's higher saturation, and sadly the S10's powerful exposure tendencies sometimes can translate into the elevated level of noise. For this shot I would definitely choose the S9, which took the most balanced picture in terms of the exposure and levels of noise. The S10 struggled the most, with a lot of artifacts and that pink tint to the whole image. The S20 is not any better really, a picture is too dark because of the underexposure. Otherwise, low-light performance is once again very comparable between each, but in terms of night mode, the S9 falls behind quite a lot. Most of the time it cannot focus and the pictures often came out looking blurry. In this area the S20 wins. Night mode pictures are slightly brighter and it can handle those bright spots better. Just notice those lanterns in the picture. I'm also a fan of this newly added animation, which shows you how long you have to hold the phone steady to get the best results, quite similar to that in the iPhone. To sum up, I find all of those phones very compatible. It's obvious that Samsung didn't make any significant changes to the main camera, but rather a few minor tweaks. Although some of you may ask, is it worth upgrading? So, if you have the Galaxy S9, I would say yes. Those two extra cameras, improved night mode and better stabilization are without a doubt worth considering a change. But which one to choose, and what about switching from the S10 to the new S20? Well, regarding the price and the overall performance, the S10 is a clear winner in this comparison, at least for me. The Galaxy S20 has weaker HDR, worse optical qualities, autofocus issues, and even despite the slight increase in the sensor size, I haven't found any noticeable improvements in the level of detail in both pictures and videos. But let me know which one you think is better. Consider watching my other stuff, especially direct Galaxy S10 vs S20 camera comparison, if you want to know more about variations between the two. See you in the next one. Peace.